Welcome back for another episode of Pursuit of Passion. I'm Chef Jamie Bordonaro, and I'm here to share with you recipes, tips, and techniques to help you cook memorable meals for you and your loved ones. Today we have a special edition, a special episode, where I am featuring the Artisan Clam Chowder. That's right, it's our take at Artisan Restaurant at the Delamar Hotel in West Hartford, Connecticut, on the New England Clam Chowder, featuring our beautiful shellfish from Gulf Shrimp down in Plantsville. I am proud to be the sous chef at Artisan Restaurant at the Delamar Hotel, the heart of West Hartford Center. Let's start cutting our ingredients. So we'll start out with the leek, which is a member of the onion family, but has a little bit more of a mild, subtly sweet note to it. Just trimming off the root end here. And that will expose the layers within the leek. And it's also important to note that you absolutely have to diligently wash your leeks thoroughly, because a lot of dirt tends to become trapped within those layers. So I'll show you how we go about doing that. The top part is great to save for a vegetable stock, so we'll set that aside. We'll cut it directly down the middle vertically, and that will give us a flat cutting surface from which to safely cut our leek. So we just go right down the middle, keep those fingers secure away from the knife. Remember, safety first. And you can see all these beautiful layers within the leek. Now, to go about cutting everything, so the aromatics we're going to small dice because the chowder does not need a great deal of time to actually cook overall. So we want the aromatics to slowly render their flavor and aroma. Cutting them too large would leave them with a bit of a raw taste in your chowder, which would overwhelm the palate. The star of this chowder, clam chowder, is of course the clam. So we'll just cut even strips, about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch thick. Then once you get to a point where it's a little bit wobbly, you can just simply rotate your leek to give yourself leverage and a better angle. And we'll repeat with the other half. Then simply take each half and go back and make a dice out of it. Kind of an interesting pointer that I learned in professional kitchens is you can almost create a more accurate dice when you envision the squaring of your ingredient. So you can kind of look to the right where you're about to make the cut, and you can see when it forms a perfect square, you know you're making the accurate cut. And just repeat that all the way down. Doing your best to keep the pieces tightly together. That'll ensure that you have an even cut all the way down. And of course, it's always important to have your knife nice and sharp. That will prevent any slipping or any potential injury, and we don't want that. Once you get to the end, we'll set those aside. Any scraps that you have that might be uneven, set those aside, and you can make a delicious aromatic vegetable stock with it. And now we can move on to our celery. Again, rinsed beforehand. We're not worried about any striations like with the leek. A celery is pretty dense. Simply remove the bitter leaves from your celery, and we could actually be very efficient about this so that we don't waste anything. So we'll get rid of just the leaves, and this part is perfectly delicious as well. And we'll make a cut down the center of the celery to help us have a flat cutting surface to work from. Trim off a little uneven end. Once again, right down the middle. And you can see it's setting us up for a beautiful dice that will render nicely in our chowder that we start cooking. Simply line up your celery pieces and just start cutting just like we did with the leek. Again, keeping your knuckles against that blade of the knife to keep your fingertips safe. And we'll just finish that process, set the celery aside. Give a quick wipe down to our cutting board for the next ingredient. Always important to clean as you go. It takes away a lot of the potential stress of cooking, which shouldn't be at all. So our fennel, delicious, fragrant, aromatic ingredient to use. We're going to go right down the center, keeping your non-cutting hand on the sides for security, and cut with the tip of the knife pointing downwards so that it makes contact first, and that'll help make a safe and even cut. And then the base of the knife goes down and all the way through. And it's important with fennel, it has a really dense solid core, so we want to cut that out from the get-go, because the relatively short cooking time of the chowder itself will not allow that core to break down. But again, set it aside, save it for a nice, delicious vegetable stock. Everything can be used, everything serves a purpose in cooking. And cutting fennel is pretty similar to cutting an onion. It does have layers, so you're probably not going to get a 100% perfect dice, but as long as the pieces are consistent, they will cook evenly, which is the most important part. So we're just going to make nice, even slices all down the length, and then go right back and simply use the same method with the other vegetables that we used. After this recipe, you will be a pro at dicing vegetables. So we'll set those aside and just repeat the process with the other half of the fennel. Onto our white onion. I've already taken the liberty of peeling it, and we only need about half of an onion for this recipe. So I'm just going to make some vertical cuts. Again, about the same length, the same width as the other ingredients, about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. And then we'll go horizontally. This will help to create even layers that once we cut through will give us a nice consistent dice. Then simply again go down through, and you can see it creates a lovely dice that will render beautifully in the cooking of our chowder. And this chowder, although some chowders, some clam chowders tend to use bacon as a starter, we actually forego the bacon because we want to let the clams and the shellfish really shine. It kind of has a nice nuanced flavor to it. In the meantime, we can start heating up our pan. I'm using a straight-sided pan called a sauteuse, and this will help to sweat the aromatics, render them down, extracting that flavor and all that moisture, and also help to sort of steam the ingredients to speed up the process as well. Finish up that garlic. And the garlic and onion I like to put in the chowder at about the same time, because they cook at relatively the same time, and they're also very close cousins in terms of the allium family. So we'll just set those right with each other. And now the only other ingredient that needs to be sliced is our parsley. For the parsley, I'm going to actually use my Japanese Suisun inox knife. It has a very sharp blade which helps to slice through the herbs without damaging them or bruising them. So I've picked our parsley leaves from the stems and just simply layer a few at a time. And we're going to use a slicing motion, and it's very important to slice through the parsley rather than chopping downward, which would bruise the delicate leaves of our parsley. So just starting out with as thin as you can go. Nice rough chiffonade, if you will, which just means ribbon cut. And then turn them around, and we'll just run the knife right through again using that slicing motion. Once we have them relatively small, I'm going to go back and use a chopping motion. Which, as long as your knife is sharp enough, it will cut and chop and mince that parsley without bruising it and turning it dark. We want the parsley to be as vibrant and fresh as possible when we garnish our finished chowder. And especially when you have anything that's cooked for a little bit of time, with stews as well, it's nice to have a fresh herb note at the end to accent it. All right, we'll set our parsley aside for later. So, for our chowder, what we like to do is add in a little bit of a fresh oyster taste to the chowder for presentation. So let's multitask and make this an oyster opening demo. So these are beautiful no-ank oysters that we get from the Gulf Shrimp Company, a local oyster, fresh and delicious. I'm using a towel that will prevent me from potentially poking my hand, and I am securing our oyster using an oyster knife, which has a nice fine tip that will allow us to access the inside of this little opening here in the oyster. And we're just going to simply, we're not using a lot of force at first. It's all about leverage. So what you want to do is just wiggle your knife in very gently until it stops. Then you know you've reached the point where you can crack the oyster right open. So we're just going to use our wrist and twist. There we go. It becomes unhinged. That's how we know we have a successful entry into our oyster. And now we're going to use the oyster knife to go up against the roof, the top shell of the oyster. That will prevent us from damaging the beautiful oyster meat. We just slide all the way to the end, and we have a beautiful open oyster with no cuts or tears, which would leach out the beautiful liquid. And then simply to detach the oyster, go right underneath and scrape that muscle. And this will be a lovely touch to the end of our chowder. We also feature fresh clams and mussels. The mussels are from Maine. The clams are local little neck clams. We steam them very simply in a similar pan as this sauteuse right here with shallots, black peppercorn, tarragon, and white wine. You can use the same pan for both. I would recommend, though, cooking the clams first, Then once a few of the clams start to open, you can add in your mussels, which cook quicker. And by the time the mussels are cooked and opened, the clams will be cooked and open as well. And those will be a great garnish in this chowder once we finish it up. So, on to cooking our chowder. The ingredient list looks a bit lengthy, but the ingredients are very familiar, and all of them serve a distinct purpose, contributing to the nuances and fragrances and aromas of our finished chowder. We have our aromatics that we diced. We'll start out our chowder cooking with a little butter. I'm going to test the heat of the pan, make sure it's not too hot. And this is about 3.5 to 4 ounces of butter. And we have a beautiful sizzle on it, and it's not browning, which is absolutely perfect. The first aromatic ingredient I like to add in is the fennel because it takes the longest to cook, so we'll go ahead and add that in. Along with a pinch of kosher salt. The salt, again, will add seasoning to your chowder, but also help to draw out the moisture in the fennel, which has a ton of beautiful aroma. After the fennel begins to sweat and become translucent, we'll add our leeks, along with the celery, because they cook at relatively the same time. Then we go in with our onion and garlic. After that, we'll add in flour. Flour is the thickener to this chowder. And once it mixes with the butter, it'll help to thicken the broth once we add in our liquid ingredients. And we're going in with our celery and leeks, adding another layer of flavor with our kosher salt. Draw out the moisture there. Once they become translucent, you can go ahead in with your onion and garlic. And while that's cooking, we can go ahead and get a hot pan on for the garnish to this chowder. So we'll continue drawing out the moisture in our aromatics. We'll get a pan on the garnish for this chowder. We have beautiful shrimp that we've diced very simply, some wild mushrooms, fingerling potatoes that we've peeled and sliced into little coins. I'm adding some oil and a little bit of butter to the pan, and I put it in the order of the cooking method. So the shrimp will take the longest to cook, so we'll put that in the pan first, followed by our mushrooms, the potatoes, and then finally these beautiful mussels and clams, which I described earlier. So we'll go ahead and add our shrimp with a little bit of seasoning in the form of kosher salt. Along with those mushrooms that we want to get a slight bit of color, but also, of course, to cook through. Followed by the potatoes. And then our mussels and clams. So I'm going to finish those in the oven so that they don't get too much color with the direct heat of the pan. Be careful, the mussels and clams will pop at you and tell you that they are cooking. The oven will help cook them thoroughly. In the meantime, we'll start to finish up our chowder. So our aromatics, once they have sweated fully, add in that flour, which will be the thickening base to our chowder. And you're going to cook that in basically cooking it to remove the raw flour taste. And again, you might need a little more time than I'm demonstrating here, but for the sake of getting a beautiful finished chowder to the bowl, we'll speed up the process a little bit. And our liqueurs and wine, in this case, we have white wine, Pernod, and Ricard, which is an anise-based liqueur. And that's all going to give a ton of flavor and aroma. And it also kind of carries on that delicious anise fennel note, which will permeate the finished chowder. It's going to be delicious. And another layer of seasoning. And that you want to reduce by about half. And you can see the effect of the flour and how it's helping to thicken it up really nicely. Next, we'll go in with clam juice. Some of this clam juice you can actually harvest from the cooking of your mussels and clams, and then you can simply purchase the rest of the amount of clam juice that you need. So once that comes to a simmer, we'll add in our heavy cream, and it's about 2 cups each of heavy cream and clam juice. And we're going to bring that to a nice simmer and let that cook through. Add a little extra layer of seasoning if necessary. And once everything has cooked down nicely, you can see what our finished chowder will look like. A beautiful velvety texture to it. Not too thick, but definitely has a great deal of body to it, not to mention aroma. Also, as a nice little garnish, in addition to the ingredients that we have cooking in the oven, we have these beautiful fennel croutons that we add as a nice finishing touch at Artisan. And because we believe in true hospitality, we do a tableside pour of the finished chowder in these beautiful little all-clad pots. To warm up the oyster without overcooking it, we'll add it to the base of our pot along with its beautiful juice. And for each guest, we simply fill up our presentation pot with a nice helping of our chowder. And then let's go ahead and plate up our ingredients. Now that everything is cooked, we can go ahead and finish it up with some fresh parsley. Adding it last will help to maintain the vibrancy and freshness. And you can plate it as you please. I like to do my best to present it in an aesthetically pleasing manner, showcasing the beautiful shellfish. Put some mussels on there, some shrimp. Of course, we have to have beautiful potatoes for our clam chowder. Get a few of those mushrooms in there, the clam on top, maybe a few clams on top, and another piece of shrimp. We'll add in a few of these fennel croutons for texture and flavor, and another anise-based fennel accent to the finished plate. And then we will pour it tableside for the guests. Really enhancing that beautiful artisan experience. And I like to put a little more chopped parsley to garnish at the end. Again, for freshness as well as for aesthetic purposes. and you can enjoy this with a beautiful artisan rosé, our very own rosé that's made in the principal area for rosé wine, which is Provence in France. It's absolutely delicious. Its fruity notes will match nicely with the creamy chowder. It has a nice touch of crisp acidity as well, which will cut through the richness of the chowder. All for a beautiful Delamar and artisan experience. I hope I've inspired you to create memorable meals for you and your loved ones. Thank you to Nutmeg TV for the opportunity, as well as to Artisan and the Delamar Group for its hospitality and creating a beautiful New England clam chowder. Thank you so much, and please be well on your pursuit of passion.
Sometimes life just happens. Don't worry. Farmington Motorsports will get you back on the road and at a fair price. From towing to tires, emissions to transmissions.
Our ASC certified techs do it all.
Farmington Motorsports is a family-run business. We're a Napa Auto Center and AAA approved. We work on all makes and models from preventative maintenance to major repairs.
And every repair is backed by our 2-year, 24,000-mile nationwide warranty.
When life happens to you, don't worry. Farmington Motorsports.
Follow us on Instagram at nutmeg.tv.